On our Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, how do the Toronto Raptors fit now that Brandon Ingram is here? We will get into that with Mike Shearer from Basketball Poetry and the Locked On Raptors newsletter coming up in just one sec. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is, what the hell day is it? Wednesday, February the 19th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. The show is on Instagram. You can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server as well. And you can also go and subscribe for free to the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter. The voice you just heard off the top, you can read him in there every Thursday. Of course, you got Katie Heindel as well, doing national stories 4 times a week. You get my original writing about the team 5 days a week, and it's all for the low, low price of On the House. Please go and subscribe. It makes me feel very good and warm inside. Let's bring him in. It is Mike Shearer from Basketball Poetry and the Thursday edition of the Locked On Raptors and Locked On NBA newsletters that go out for every single team. If you want to go subscribe to more than just the Raptors one, please do. Mike is here to talk about Brandon Ingram and his fit in Toronto. Mike, welcome to the show. It's been a pleasure to read your work all season in the newsletter. Thrilled to have you on the pod.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really excited to be here and talk some Raptors, some Brandon Ingram, a match that I think will, go a little better than the consensus seems to be around the country here.
Yeah, let's start there. We'll get into the sort of specifics of the offensive and defensive fit a little bit later on. But I want to start with just your initial reaction to the trade. People who listen to this show, read the newsletter, know I've kind of done a 180 since it first happened. When the deal happened, I totally understood the logic behind it for the Raptors. I wasn't quite sure on the player that they applied the logic to. I think thinking about it, listening to sort of how the team has responded to bringing him in, them signing the contract and getting the free agency question out of the way, I've come around on being optimistic that it can actually work, even though I still have some reservations about the fit. But I want to know from you, Mike, outside observer, the Raptors are this team that I think kind of befuddles people. They do weird things. They kind of run counter to what sort of the standard team building procedure is for a lot of squads these days. What was your initial reaction? And it sounds to me like you're maybe a little bit more sort of understanding and perhaps pro the move than the general consensus. Why is that?
Yeah, and I want to start with kind of one of the things you said right there. Coming from a national perspective, I do think you're right. Like there does seem to be a consensus in people that have been looking back at the Raptors' plan for the last few years and been like, what are they doing? Why aren't they blowing this up for picks? Why aren't they starting over? Like, what's the plan? And I actually think the plan has been pretty crystal clear from the get-go. It's They want to rebuild, skip the uncertainty of the draft, more or less, right? Not entirely. Sure. They want to leave themselves a few outs, but like, why take a risk on a lottery selection when you can take in talented young players and kind of hope to nurture their upside and see where they can go from there? You can quibble with like their evaluation of which players to kind of do that with, but I think given that that is the plan, I think bringing in Brandon Ingram to complement the existing core actually makes a lot of sense. I think there's no such thing as a perfect fit in the NBA. It's very, very rare that in any team, in any situation, that you'll be able to bring in a star of the caliber of Ingram into a new team, and it's going to be, a perfectly smooth fit for what they have going on. But I think that the strengths he brings are things that the Raptors desperately need, which is kind of individual shot making, the sort of like B+, A- skill set at almost everything on offense, a very well-rounded offensive player that is going to give them a lot of outs. I think there's going to be a lot of creativity Darko can use when he's kind of trying to slot Ingram in around Scottie Barnes and, even Yaktle. I think there's going to be some fun combinations there. So I just think that Ingram's ability in theory to kind of mold his game a little bit around people. And we can talk more about that, how feasible that is, but he has the skill set that he can kind of play a bunch of different roles within the offense, depending on who's on the court with him.
Yeah, for sure. To the point of the shot creation. I mean, that's the big thing, right? It's been such a challenge for Scottie Barnes this year, just kind of having to do something from nothing way too often. Obviously, quickly being out has fed into that and led to, I think, the sort of less than stellar efficiency numbers for Scottie on the season. But just having someone who can create while Scottie can just kind of go get to the spots from which he can succeed, I think that's going to change the dynamics of the team quite a bit. Again, we'll get into the fit concerns and all of that. I also love the point you made about there just never being a perfect fit. And I'm certainly like someone who has fallen ill with this because I think Raptors fans in general may be a little bit spoiled with this regard because the championship team, like that starting five is maybe the best fitting starting five that we've like ever seen in basketball. It's just like, oh, if you're going to build like a basketball utopia of guys who fit together perfectly with their skills, it's probably that Toronto Raptors starting five with Lowry, Green, Siakam, Kawhi, and Marc Gasol by the end. Like it was unbelievable. You're going to be chasing that dragon for the rest of your life, frankly. Like it's going to be tough to ever find that kind of fit. And I think that was my big concern originally with the Ingram thing was like, okay, the fit is not obvious here. It's going to take some massaging. It's going to take some adaptation from both Ingram and Scottie Barnes, probably a little RJ Barrett. Like Darko Rajakovic is going to have to get creative. But I think like in that, I maybe sort of like I just kind of left out the possibility that all these guys can just do that. Like these are pros. These are talented people. They are like trying to go and win. Brandon Ingram said all the right things, but wanting to adapt and kind of adjust his game to fit into what the Raptors need. Like, what's your sort of belief in sort of the general idea of guys being able to sort of adapt when they get to a new situation and sort of the agency they have to kind of leave the bad habits of the past behind them? You know, it's a hit and miss thing. Surely some guys do it better than others, but what's your sort of general philosophy on that? Like, is fit ever going to be that big a concern for you when talent can be acquired in, the way the Raptors did here with such a buy low?
Yeah, fit is always a concern, I think. What I would say, though, is I think Ingram has had a lot more evolution in his game than people realize. My sense is that people think Ingram is just like this guy who goes out there and like hoops and does the thing that hoopers do. And he wants to get to his mid-range spot and he wants to pass up these catch and shoot opportunities. And all of that is true to an extent. But if you trace his journey, it's actually been really interesting. He came in with the Lakers, obviously, and pretty much ignored the three-point line. Got moved to New Orleans in the Anthony Davis trade. And there a few different interesting things happened. He started his career in New Orleans actually jacking up a good number of three-pointers. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. And first, he had two coaches that were much more militant about the math and proper spacing, stuff like that, and Alvin Gentry and Stan Van Gundy right off the bat. And they were not super comfortable letting him just like do his own thing all the time. They wanted to make sure that he was behind the three-point line. And they kind of, I would say, forced him to do so to, decent effect. The other thing is that Ingram has always said he plays better with a kind of true point guard, or at least with like a very strong passing individual. This is something that Ingram has been on record as saying. And when he started his career first in New Orleans, it was with, Lonzo Ball and Drew Holiday. And Lonzo Ball has a tendency to get guys comfortable no matter where on the court they are, right? Like that's just something that Lonzo's always been able to do. And Drew Holiday, especially back then, was a very effective drive and kick kind of player. And the second year when Ingram was still shooting a lot of three-pointers, he had Point Zion was kind of unleashed and healthy for, one of the few times in his career and was able to generate a lot of easy looks for Brandon Ingram. Because an important thing about Ingram is he's an excellent catch and shoot three-point shooter, but he is not good off the dribble at all. Like the splits are wild compared to your typical high usage offensive player. So I think an important question is going to be how much can Quickly play into that role for Toronto with Ingram? How much can Quickly, and maybe Barnes to an extent in the same way that Zion did it, right? Like how much can the primary distributors on Toronto make Ingram's life easier? I think he's open to it. It's when New Orleans kind of lost that steady playmaking force, either through injury because of Zion or the losses of Drew Holiday and Lonzo Ball. And Ingram became the primary playmaker and he had to do more stuff off the dribble. That's when you saw his three-point shooting dip down. It became harder. It became more of like what people think of as Ingram today, the mid-range, everything kind of guy, high turnover guy. But, I'll end by saying like, hey, this season before he got injured, he had shown a little bit more self-awareness. He had been shooting more three-pointers again. I think he realized that his money hinged upon him adapting his game to the needs of whatever team was going to end up with Ingram. I don't think that New Orleans thought they were going to have Ingram through the rest of the year. I don't think Ingram thought he was going to stay in New Orleans through the rest of the year. And I think he knew he needed to show whatever team was going to acquire him that he could adjust and play a more modern game.
Right. We'll come back on the other side here, Mike, and get into the actual offensive fit. Ingram, Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett, I think maybe the three guys really in focus here at the 2, 3, and 4. We'll get to that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at Prize Picks, the single best way to play daily fantasy sports anywhere. Football season might be over, but basketball action is just heating up, and there's no better way to get in on the excitement than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. It's very simple. All you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 player projections for a given night's stats. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you control the action all season long. Maybe you are going into Friday night's game against the Miami Heat and you're looking at the Raptors and saying, maybe Emmanuel quickly is going to finally break out, have himself a game where he scores in the high 20s in points. You can take the more on quickly points and play that hunch. You can do it with anyone on the Raptors, anyone around the NBA. Of course, you got college basketball and the men's and women's sides going right now too. That's all there for you to go peruse at Prize Picks, all kinds of sports to play around with it. Hey, the Four Nations face-off, the final, Canada-USA Thursday. If you're a hockey fan, that'll be on there as well with projections you can go and peruse. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Back at it here with Mike Shearer of Basketball Poetry. Everyone go subscribe to his wonderful works. And of course, you can subscribe to the Locked On Raptors newsletter, where you will see his work every Thursday as well. Great breakdowns in there. Been loving reading those throughout the year. Yes, I read my own newsletter. You got to help the stats, man. Anyway, Mike, the offense. This has been sort of, I think, the big struggle point for the Raptors this year. They're not good on either end of the floor. I think it was expected on defense. I think there was maybe higher hopes for the offense, and it just hasn't worked. Obviously, quickly being out has been a big problem. Scottie Barnes has been put in positions where he's having to lean too much on pull-up threes above the break and not really able to kind of get the ball in spots where he can really make teams pay. It's been, there have been moments where it's worked. There have been moments where it's not. The games where quickly looked great. It's kind of all snapped into place. But Ingram, I think, as we've talked about, is just going to make things a little bit easier for everybody. The big question is Ingram, Scottie, and RJ Barrett. Those 3 guys, I think that has been, if you're talking about sort of the national perspective on this trade, it's been a lot of, well, those guys can't play together. That's not going to work. And I get it, right? RJ Barrett, not exactly someone you sort of look at and say, hey, high quality 3-point shooter, going to take a ton for you, going to space, going to make defenses worry about him shooting. Scottie Barnes shooting 25-ish% from 3 this season. It's been rough stuff for him from downtown. Ingram, reticent to shoot threes, as we've talked about at recent times in his past. What is your view on how those guys can fit and complement each other on offense? Like, I've kind of shared my thoughts on the show about Barrett maybe not being as big a concern for me because he is more of this sort of low touch time, off ball cutter, off the catch, sort of coming around a curl, barreling towards the rim, doesn't need to start possessions with the ball in his hands. Maybe a different story for Scottie and Ingram, who also, if you look at their shot charts, it's basically just like layering them over one another. They're basically the same. What are your impressions of those 3 guys in particular and how they can interact in a positive way on the floor?
Yeah, I definitely think that starting with the kind of the Barnes Ingram 2-man game, it'll just be so nice for Scottie to have someone who is a major threat on the court with him, right? Like, it's been a while since Pascal Siakam, I guess, wasn't that long ago, but Ingram is a little bit more dynamic with the ball than Siakam. I think, as great as Siakam has played for both Toronto and Indiana, like, Ingram is capable of some things that very few players in the NBA are. I think that Ingram is best when he's kind of, got the ball on the move. He gets it. He's able to come in off a handoff or off a pick and roll, get into the teeth of the defense, make some really quick decisions, hopefully either with the pass or with the shot. Ingram has had a tendency a little bit to settle for these sort of like 10-foot jumpers and things like that. But I think, I hope that having a healthy Scottie Barnes next to him will also do the same kind of favor, where there's going to be a lot more defensive attention paid to Barnes than to, New Orleans Pelican player X, CJ McCollum, or whoever it is, right? Like, I think that the same way that Barnes has not played with a guy like Ingram, it's kind of the same with Ingram, because Zion's just never healthy and, is never there to kind of take away some of the defensive attention. There is going to have to be an adjustment between them. To your point, like, a lot of their shots do come from kind of the same areas. I think that there are ways to utilize Barnes's playmaking skills with Ingram to make some beautiful music. Ingram is going to have to ramp up some of his cutting abilities, something he hasn't done a lot of in the past. He's proven to be good at it when he wants to. It's just that he's so often had the ball in his hands, the Pelicans offense, frankly, does not require him to do a lot of cutting, whereas the Raptors one will. And I think he's going to be able to make that adjustment. And I think he's going to love playing with a really tall, really talented passer who can kind of exploit certain passing angles that like the Pelicans, CJ McCollum just can't, frankly.
Sure.
And so I'm excited to see what that looks like once there's going to be a little feeling out period, no question. And I think the great thing about this season is like there is time for the feeling out to occur, right? The Raptors are no longer concerned with wins, and they might be extremely concerned with losses. We can talk about that a little bit more at the end too, but there's going to be a feeling out period, but eventually I think it's like Ingram's off-ball movement should pair nicely with Barnes' playmaking and vice versa. I would love to see a lot of like Barnes screening for Ingram coming downhill, Barnes rolling, and I think that's going to put a lot of defenses in a pickle. Sorry, your thoughts there?
No, yeah, I was just like, to me, the way this works is if they can leverage one another to both kind of increase their rim frequency, but in particular, Scottie. Like, Scottie's such a devastating finisher once he gets to the rim. He just hasn't gotten there much at all this year. Career low for him, 26% rim frequency. And previously in his career, he's been around 36, 38, 35%. Ingram's always been kind of a low rim frequency guy. I'm not really expecting him to come in and go from 18% up to 35% or anything like that. And actually, I think the fact that he can kind of burn teams from, a little further away is actually kind of a feature and not a bug of his game when it comes to, sort of the fit with Scottie. Like, it kind of frees Scottie up to not have to take those shots. Yes, he's worked on the mid-range bag. Yes, that sort of 12-foot baseline turnaround has become kind of money for him, but where Scottie's really going to eat is if he can just kind of get into those easy spots around the rim where he's really tough to stop. He's had success in his career as a roll man. Some of his best stretches have come as a roll man. And I think using Ingram as a guy to kind of leverage that, I love the idea of them running pick and roll with one another. You could maybe get into situations where it gets a little bit switchy and it's hard to kind of make good on mismatches there, but not every team is going to have two Ingram and Barnes sized guys to go throw at you. And so I do think there's some pretty fun things you can go and do with that combo. Where do you figure RJ fits into all of this? I talked about my fit sort of lack of concern with him, but I understand the reticence, especially if people are maybe sort of still thinking of an older version of RJ Barrett. I don't think anyone really watches the Raptors. Why would you? They've been bad for 2 years, but Barrett has like totally streamlined his game. The sort of move from New York and the sort of introduction to Darko ball has really changed just the way he approaches things. I think there's room for him to fit here. Are you concerned about the shooting, especially when you consider that Yaktle is the big man here, and it's just not ever going to be like a full, true 4 or 5 out spacing environment for RJ, Ingram, and Scottie to coexist with him?
Yeah, definitely a little concerned about that. But I think your previous point is valid. I think that Barrett has also, as you pointed out, changed his game completely since he's come to Toronto. Like, if you ever look at his shot chart, it is pristine Morey ball type stuff, right? It is only threes, only rim attempts. And, you can argue that maybe he hasn't made as many of those as we'd like, but it's definitely streamline is a great way to put it. And the way he's been able to improve his playmaking, like fairly late into his career is surprising. You don't see too many guys who have become so much quicker at just like reading the floor and reacting the way that Barrett has in the last couple of years. And I think he'll benefit from being dropped down in the pecking order. He's a guy who's maybe been a little bit too overtaxed, particularly early in the season when he was like sort of looking around and he's like, who are these guys on the court with me right now? And I think that it'll be better for him to be dropped down to sort of like a third or fourth option. I do kind of feel like his destiny eventually will be very high-end sixth man. These three are going to overlap fairly heavily, but I would imagine that Darko is going to try to stagger things as much as possible so there's just two of them on the court at all times, particularly given the presence of Pirtle. Who I'm actually really excited to see play with Ingram. I think some of Pirtle's playmaking and some of the delay actions that the Raptors really love to run are going to play into Ingram's strengths. He can come down off, pin down from Scottie. Scottie rolls down to the hoop while Ingram's coming up towards Pirtle for a handoff. Like, I think that there are ways to make that a very devastating attack. The question is, what is Barrett going to be doing while those three are doing on the right side, right? Like, can Barrett draw enough defensive attention on the weak side? He's gotten better with his cuts. There's a funny quote Emmanuel quickly had a year or two ago. I think while they were on Toronto, but he said something like, Barrett only cuts when he thinks he's about to score. And I don't think that that's as true anymore. Like, I think he's gotten much better with sort of this sense of like these sacrificial cuts, the kind that are drawing attention away from the defense. And that's something he can continue to improve upon to make himself effective, even when he's on the floor with these other guys who are better with the ball in their hands.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And look, at some point, if he just keeps shooting 37% on 5 catch and shoots a game, that will also make defenses care. Like it's probably not something defenses really give a damn about right now, but if that can be a thing that sustains, which, hey, like he's been a pretty solid catch and shoot guy now for over a year since the trade, maybe that's something that kind of helps massage this along as well. And I'm with you. Like I really like the idea of RJ becoming a 6-man. I think those are always difficult conversations. And will they actually kind of get that buy-in from him if that's a conversation they ever broach? Who's to say? Well, there's also no guarantee RJ will be on the team next year. As we've talked about the financial situation, if the Raptors don't want to pay the tax, especially if they get, a pick, in the top 3 or so, it's going to necessitate someone moving. And RJ just is the kind of obvious guy because of positional overlap and abundance. But I would like them to still like to see them just pay the tax and see what they've got here. Because I think the version of this team with RJ on it is the most talented. And I think I would just kind of go to war with that above, turning him into a couple of nice bench pieces or something like that, at least for now. Like, see what you got next year and then maybe make an evaluation at the deadline, something like that. I'm also fascinated to see, if they move RJ and sort of stagger him and run him with second units, what does it look like with Grady Dick? What does it look like with Jacoby Walter? What does it look like with Ochai Agbaji? Like that gets really interesting to me, especially, kind of having that sort of amplifier of extra shooting and space and gravity. What does that do to free up the Ingram Scottie 2-man stuff? Any quick thoughts on sort of other guys on the Raptors? We're talking largely about the starting 5 here because, hey, that's where like all of the money is going.
Right.
But any other quick thoughts on sort of other ways this offense could get greased along and guys who might be key, pivotal sort of catalysts for getting the best out of Ingram?
Yeah, if you can't put a ton of shooting on the floor, and the Raptors could, but it would require benching some of their guys, right? That like
Sure.
are higher up in the pecking order. But like if you can't, the way you have to maximize the spacing is through cutting and little clever little passes on the interior. And I think like the Miami Heat are a team that's been able to kind of pull this off in the past when they've had Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and another wing that can't shoot. And they've been able to do a lot of stuff with just like these really small movements, these really tight, snug pick and rolls that are like 15 feet from the hoop. And not that Miami's ever had like an amazing offense, but they've been able to generate points despite like pieces that didn't like fit all that well together. So to your point, like it would be great if they could get, Dick out there to help space the floor a little bit better. Like you can see how they can come up with lineups that are going to be offensive forces. It is a little trickier to do it if you're assuming that it's going to be all they're going to include Barrett and Pirtle and Barnes and Ingram, right? Like then there's only one spot left for Quickly or Dick or whoever it is. And it does feel like at some point the need for shooting might just overpower everything else. A lot of this really hinges on Quickly, I think. Like we haven't talked too much about him yet, but I think Quickly's a guy I was never super high on in New York, frankly. And it's been very difficult to judge him in Toronto just because we haven't seen that much of him, particularly next to the other key players. But if he is able to develop into this sort of like threes and pass kind of point guard who can play good enough defense, like that's going to be such a key, because if you can have him out there nailing every catch or every shot off the catch, that just opens up a lot of doors for their offense. I just don't know that he's going to be that guy. I don't know that that's how he sees himself, right? Quickly is another guy who I think can do stuff off the bounce and wants to do stuff off the bounce. And I'm not sure that that's going to be the best fit for him.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I have said that I think the path for Quickly to sort of make good on his contract is to sort of be a Mike Conley type, right? And he's never going to be like the internal clock that is Mike Conley, where he's just got like ultimate point guard brain. But I do think, you look at the sort of the ball security stuff, you look at some of the passing package with him. I do think there is that sort of, like you said, threes and pass point guard within him there. And it might just be a matter of, hey, maybe Ingram kind of helps everything settle into place and he kind of assumes that role. I just, if you view him as like a high octane scoring combo guard, I just don't think he has the full 3-level package to really make that happen. But I do think he's got the point guard chops, if that can kind of be a developmental track they send him down, to really excel in that role and be like a perfectly cromulent third or fourth guy on a good team, kind of guiding the ship. Here's hoping, because he's the Raptors are paying him a lot of money. He's a big factor in all of this, whether Ingram's on the team or not. We're going to come back on the other side here, Mike, get into the defense, which I am like fascinated to see. We know that Brandon Ingram is maybe not, got the greatest defensive reputation, but can playing next to Destroyer of Worlds, Scottie Barnes, bring out the best of him? We will get to that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by TurboTax. And look, I've talked a lot about Intuit TurboTax on this show. I've talked a lot about how much I hate doing my taxes on this show. I'm a freelancer. Doing my taxes is a nightmare every single year, but TurboTax can make it that much easier. Get rid of the waiting, wondering, and worrying. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every single deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy so you do not have to worry about it all, so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Wrapping it up here, talking Brandon Ingram and his fit with the Toronto Raptors with Mike Shearer of Basketball, Poetry, and the Locked On family of NBA newsletters. Check out his work every single Thursday. Mike, the defense. It's been the sort of story of the second half of the season for the Raptors, really, is them kind of figuring out how to be at least adequate. There was a stretch there of 10 or so games where they were the number one defense in the NBA. Since January, they're kind of middle of the pack, 13th, 14th, kind of hovering around there. Way better than where they were last year as an awful, no good defense. And at the start of this season, where they were still an awful, no good defense. It's come around a little bit. And I think a big part of it is Scottie Barnes has been unbelievable. It's been sustained. He has just been this sort of floor raiser on defense. When he's on the floor, the Raptors play at a top 10 clip defensively. That's just it. Brandon Ingram has not been necessarily considered a great wing defender. He's long, which goes a long way in the sport where tall guys thrive, but it's not ever been like something where, he's going to go and shut down the opposing best wing or anything like that. But I'm curious about sort of just the value of length and how you view Ingram fitting in with this team, in particular that Scottie Pirtle front court. I'm really bullish on it, even though I don't think the perimeter defense on this team is any great shakes. Barrett has had his moments, although he's been a little bit better of the last couple of weeks, like really seeming, he took a call out from Scottie Barnes and seems to have really, taken it and run with it. I think Quickly actually has shown some nice chops as a guy with like better screen navigation, and rotationally he's always been a pretty solid defender. Like, I think there's enough there that just the length of Ingram, Scottie, Pirtle across that 3-4-5 might be enough to make this a pretty good defense. Do you share my optimism there?
Yeah, I think that Ingram's defense has been not unfairly maligned, but it has evolved and his reputation has not. Ingram came over to New Orleans and kind of took over the team and put all of his effort and his energy into offense and left defense behind. But I think over time in New Orleans, I think one thing that, I criticized Willie Green a little bit for letting Ingram play to sort of his comfort zone instead of forcing him behind the 3-point line. But one thing that I think was impressive is that Willie Green really got Ingram to buy back in on defense. And I think, up to this year, I think Ingram was a perfectly solid defender. And the tell is in the data. Teams never attack him in isolation. And they rarely even kind of go at him in the pick and roll. So opposing offenses are doing, I wouldn't say they're going out of their way to avoid him. Right? This isn't Kawhi Leonard we're talking about here, but he's not the weak link on the floor. And I think that will carry over to Toronto. I think because he's not super slow laterally. I think he is willing to slide his feet. I think he's the length is very helpful, particularly when, there's a ball handler coming down at him. He can kind of spread those pterodactyl wings and, deny the pocket pass and keep a hand up to contest the shooter. I think that Ingram's a pretty solid defender when he's engaged. And because he is so big, it gives him a nice margin for error. To your point, the Raptors starting five is going to be lacking. It's sort of like who's going to be that perimeter star? Who's going to guard the opposing best player every night? If it's a point guard, it'll be Quickly, no problem. If it's a LeBron-sized player, if it's like a big wing, can Barrett hold up against the really big guys? I don't know. Hopefully it'll be Barnes, but he's probably better off not being necessarily like the on-ball stopper every time against the opposing alpha. I'll let you correct me there if I'm wrong. So I do think there could be a little bit of weirdness there, but just having the safety blankets of Pirtle and Barnes behind him should free Ingram up to be a little bit more active on the perimeter. And that's something that, they haven't really had in New Orleans for a while. There's always been a little bit of a hole at center. They had Valanciunas, who isn't really that kind of shot blocker in the past. And Zion is not really, recently he's improved, but Zion was never really that kind of guy. So it'll be interesting to see what Ingram looks like with like a true defensive backbone behind him to support it.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing with Scottie is, last year he really was excelling as that sort of low man help guy, kind of flying over, blocking shots, just kind of creating events on defense. This year, he's layered in some of that perimeter defense stuff. And I'm fascinated to see, do they use Ingram as that help side guy at all to kind of give Scottie run against those opposing wings at times? Again, it's not going to be an every night type of thing. There are going to be certain matchups where you're going to want Scottie closer to the rim, but what do you make of Ingram's ability to fill in the event Scottie becomes, all right, let's say they're playing the Celtics and you throw Scottie on Jason Tatum. He's had some success guarding him this year. But you want to keep Ingram kind of close to the rim. He's enormous, like we've talked about. Do you think he has that sort of help side rim protection, sort of, like safety ability within him to kind of fill in those gaps for Scottie? Or is this going to be a situation where they're really going to want Scottie in that low man spot more often than not and just kind of have Ingram work on the perimeter as best he can?
Yeah, that's a good question. We really won't know what the best fit will be until we see them together, because I think Ingram can do that thing. I don't know that it's necessarily his strength. Like, he is big enough. His block rates historically have been pretty okay, like, for the position. Like, he's not a nothing. He will provide that secondary rim protection to a degree, but he's also not, Giannis coming over, right? Like, he's not going to be a huge deterrent, I would say. He is better at navigating these kind of midair dogfights than he is at keeping people away from them in the first place. So I suspect that the Raptors are going to try to throw a lot of defensive looks at opposing offenses. And I think that we will see a lot of every kind of strategy until they figure out which ones kind of work. But one of the strengths of having a team with as many kind of long athletes as the Raptors is that you can adjust your game plan night to night. As you said, some nights you're just going to want to keep Scottie Barnes right next to the rim. Other nights you might want him out on the perimeter wreaking havoc. So I think we're going to see a lot of everything. And I don't really know what the best look is until we see it in action. But to answer your question, I do think Ingram can do a little bit of almost everything on defense. For sure.
And the other thing I love about Ingram is, like, just the length helps them elongate lineups in a way that they haven't really been able to since they traded Siakam and OG and Precious Achiuwa. Like, they went from being this crazy long athletic team to kind of just having Scottie and a bunch of 6'5" dudes running around. And you throw in Ingram. You look at what Jonathan Mobo's done as a defender as a rookie. We'll see how the offense comes along, but man, that dude's defense is horrifying and like in a good way. Yeah. And like the concept of, even smaller lineups where it's like Mobo, Scottie, Ingram at the 3-4-5, or, maybe you find yourself some sort of, stretch bench big and so, obviously those are hard guys to find, but if you can find yourself someone like that to go, even like if you throw Chris Boucher out, if he's going to be on the team next year as your Udonis Haslem of the future, like, there are ways I think to kind of do the Raptors thing that is kind of deep within their soul, which is just have a bunch of dudes and switch everything. That I think it's pretty fascinating to think about. Like, yeah, we'll see how it all comes. Like, what do you think of Ingram as like a switch defender? Is that something that you think he can hang out as well?
Yeah, I actually think that's probably closer to his strength. Ingram has just enough quickness that he can hold up. You wouldn't want to start him on like a point guard, right? Or some kind of jitterbug shooting guard, but he has enough quickness that he can hold up there for 4 or 5 seconds at a time. And he's even played like a smattering of small ball center for the Pelicans in the past. Not so much this year, but in the past he's done a little tiny bit. And again, it's not his ideal form, I would say, but it is something that he can do if necessary. And he's not super strong when he's going up against the big guys, but he is able to kind of do that Chet Holmgren thing where he gets a shoulder in his chest and he just kind of like folds forward and is able to get a finger on the ball anyway, and that's to your point. That's what just like having that kind of size is able to do. So I do think that Ingram is never going to be a stopper against anybody specifically, but he's also never a huge black hole weakness against anybody either. And I think that, you can be versatile without necessarily being amazing at anything, but I do think that versatility will be key in a Raptors team that seems set up to kind of utilize that pretty well.
For sure. And I haven't really talked about it, but Ochai Agbaji, I think, again, kind of elongates these type of lineups too. Yeah, man. Yeah. It's just like old reliable, man. Mr. Dependable. Just throw him in as the 5th starter with Ingram and IQ and Scottie and Yak. I think that could be pretty interesting. Like that might be what I advocate to just be the starting lineup next year, honestly.
Yeah. I do think it's funny how many guys have, like, Toronto obviously has had some, hasn't had a ton of success recently, but I think it's funny how many guys have reinvigorated or revitalized their careers in Toronto over that time frame too. Like Agbaji, I think Barrett was a guy who was putting up numbers, but had a pretty bad reputation league wide. Like you're starting to see some nice reclamation projects maybe reclamation is too strong a word, but that does, is a good reason for hope for Ingram kind of blossoming into his maximum potential there too.
Sure. Even Davion Mitchell, who drove me absolutely nuts, like had his best run as a pro this season. Like, yeah, Darko ball, man. The guy's a wizard. I just totally in the tank for Darko. I think it's kind of fun to not really detest your coach like I maybe did the last one. We love him. He won a championship. Also,
sure.
My God, throw the guitar out the damn window, please. Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot here before we just like a quick one-word answer. Do the Raptors make the playoffs next year?
They make the play in.
Okay. I hear you.
I think they're 1 year away because, frankly, sorry, I know you said one word, but I do have to say one last thing, which is just like, I am so curious to see where their draft pick lands. And I know that's such a boring thing to say because obviously everybody is, but like, it'll be curious to see who they end up getting. I think Brandon Ingram will excel if there's a very clear pecking order on offense. And I think that's something that'll be helpful for him is if either Barnes makes this huge offensive leap or they're able to acquire a talent where like that slots Ingram firmly into that number 2 Chris Middleton status. Like, I think that's exactly where he needs to be. And I think he needs to know that's where he is. And so I do think that like just seeing who is able to make this huge leap in the next year or two is going to be so important for Ingram's success and therefore for the Raptors' success going forward.
For sure. Yeah. Like, every team needs to win the draft lottery. I think the Raptors maybe stand like to gain the most by jumping up to 1 or 2, just because they already have this assemblage of talent where if you add a Harper or a Flag to the mix, my God, things get so interesting so quickly. And, I don't think you can say that for the Hornets or the Wizards or the Jazz, where it's just like, okay, well, we got our first piece that matters now and we'll go to work from there. Mike, this was awesome, man. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just say health permitting, there is a lot of talent. This is going to be their last real big bite at the draft gods, I would say. So like, I think the future in Toronto is actually pretty bright. Like, I think there's just so many cool pieces here. And I hope Darko's kind of the guy to put them together because I do think there's a lot of fun stuff going on in Toronto.
Having a lot of good players. You could do a lot worse than that. Mike, thanks so much, man. This was awesome. Really appreciate you being on the show. We'll have to get you back again. Tell people where they can find all your great work.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I had a lot of fun. I am at basketballpoetry.com, so check that out. I write about the league at large 2 or 3 times a week. Kind of survey the field with some very topical stuff or some very in-depth statistical things. So there should be a little bit of everything for everyone. Plus, you can find me at the Locked On Raptors newsletter every Thursday, as we've said a few times. So make sure you go and download that sweet, sweet free newsletter.
It is so free and so sweet. There's really no reason not to do it. It's like going to Costco and not getting the free samples. What are you doing? We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, go to the newsletter, join the Discord, link in the description of the podcast as well. Free to do that. It's much appreciated when you go ahead and support any way that you can. We are nearly through the off week. We've got a game coming up Friday. We will get into that as the week progresses, and you probably talk about some draft stuff too, because that seems rather important for this team, as we just kind of covered. Either way, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much for hanging. Bye-bye. Damn it.